What kind of neighbor destroys a bridge just to spite you? The kind who lives in a $5 million lakefront mansion, apparently. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I built that bridge with my own hands. Every plank, every nail, every bead of sweat, because it was the only way to cross the narrow neck of Lake Serenity to my modest cabin on the far shore. For years, it stood as a quiet symbol of my independence, a rickety but reliable lifeline connecting me to the world. Then the HOA of Serenity Shores, led by the indomitable Karen Whitaker, decided it was an eyesore and tore it down in a fit of rage. They didn't just stop there. They called it a violation of their pristine aesthetic, a blight on their curated paradise. But what they didn't expect was that I'd fight back, not with fists or lawsuits, but with something far more devastating, their own precious lake. I'd lived on the far side of Lake Serenity for a decade, a small plot I inherited from my grandfather, who taught me to fish, to build, to respect the land. The lake was our sanctuary, a shimmering expanse framed by pines and rocky cliffs. My cabin was simple: cedar walls, a wood stove, a porch where I'd sip coffee and watch the herons glide. The bridge was my lifeline. Without it, I'd have to drive 20 miles around the lake to reach town, burning time and gas I couldn't always spare. The Serenity Shores HOA, though, didn't care about my needs. Their gated enclave of sprawling mansions sat on the lake's eastern shore, each house a monument to excess. Manicured lawns, private docks, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting their wealth. Karen, their president, was the queen of it all, her mansion the grandest, her word law. It started with a letter, slipped under my cabin door one crisp October morning. "Dear Mr. Caldwell," it read, "your unauthorized structure violates Serenity Shores HOA regulations. Remove it by November 1st, or we will take action." I laughed at first. My land wasn't part of their HOA. The bridge was on my property, built with permits I'd filed years ago. I ignored the letter, assuming it was a bluff. Then came the second letter, then a third, each more aggressive, accusing me of devaluing the community and disrupting the lake's natural beauty. I wrote back, politely explaining the bridge's necessity, its legal status. No response, just silence, until the morning I woke to the sound of chainsaws. I sprinted to the lake's edge, heart pounding, and saw them. Karen, her husband Greg, and two hired workers, tearing into my bridge with saws and crowbars. Planks splintered into the water, the frame collapsing like a wounded animal. Karen stood on the shore, arms crossed, her platinum hair glinting in the sun, a smirk on her face. "This is for the good of the community, Ethan," she called out, her voice dripping with condescension. I shouted for them to stop, but Greg waved a cease and desist order, claiming my bridge was encroaching on their view. By noon, it was gone, reduced to a pile of broken wood floating on the lake's surface. I stood there, fists clenched, the water lapping at my boots, and swore I'd make them pay. I spent the next week digging through records at the county office, fueled by coffee and rage. The bridge was fully permitted, built within my property lines. Their cease and desist was a sham, a power play by people who thought money could bend reality. But as I pored over old maps and deeds, I found something else, something they didn't know I'd uncover. The lake itself, Lake Serenity, wasn't entirely natural. Decades ago, my grandfather had helped build a small dam at the lake's northern end, a low structure that controlled its water levels. That dam sat on my land, and with it, I held the key to their perfect little world. I didn't act right away. Revenge, I learned, is best when it's calculated. I started small, attending an HOA meeting uninvited. The clubhouse was a cathedral of excess: marble floors, chandeliers, a bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. Karen presided like a monarch, her neighbors nodding along as she ranted about maintaining property values. I stood up, holding a copy of my deed and the dam schematics, and asked why they thought they could destroy my property without consequence. The room went silent. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she recovered quickly, dismissing me as a disgruntled outsider. The others laughed nervously, avoiding my gaze. I left, but not before slipping a note to Karen. "You broke my bridge. I'll break your lake." The threat was a seed, planted to unsettle her. I knew she'd dismiss it, but I also knew she'd start watching me. And she did. Over the next month, I noticed her husband's SUV lingering near my property line, binoculars glinting in the dusk. They were nervous, and that was exactly what I wanted. I began to study the dam, learning its mechanics, its weaknesses. It was old but functional, a concrete barrier with a manual gate that could release water into the river below. If I opened it, the lake would drain, not overnight, but steadily, enough to turn their manicured waterfronts into muddy flats. The thought of their docks stranded, their views ruined, their property values tanking, it was intoxicating. But I wasn't a monster. I didn't want to destroy the lake entirely, just enough to make a point. I consulted an engineer friend, Mark, who confirmed the dam could lower the lake by 10 feet without permanent damage. It would expose their precious shorelines, render their docks useless, and cost them a fortune to fix. Mark warned me about legal risks, but I was past caring. They'd crossed a line, and I was ready to cross one back. I spent nights sketching plans, calculating water flow, imagining Karen's face when she saw her empire crumble. The lake was my leverage, and I was ready to pull it. The plan took shape in the quiet of my cabin, where the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the distant call of loons. I'd opened the dam's gate just enough to drop the lake's level over a week, letting the water creep away from their docks, exposing the muddy underbelly of their paradise. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. They thought they could bulldoze my life because their wallets were fatter, but I'd show them power wasn't just money, it was control. I started small, testing the gate one night. The mechanism groaned, rusted from years of neglect, but it moved. Water trickled out, a whisper of what was to come. I felt a thrill, like a kid stealing a cookie, but this cookie was their entire world. Karen, though, wasn't idle. She'd rallied the HOA, spinning a narrative that I was a rogue, a threat to their community. I learned this from my neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, a kind widow who lived just outside their gates and occasionally brought me homemade jam. She'd overheard Karen at the grocery store, rallying her troops. Ethan's unhinged. He's planning something. We need to protect our investments. Mrs. Ellis warned me to watch my back, her eyes wide with worry. I thanked her, but inside, I was grinning. Let them be scared. Let them wonder. The twist came when I found a camera hidden in the trees near my cabin. A cheap, battery-powered thing pointed at my porch. They were spying on me. I left it there, untouched, and started working on the dam at night, out of sight. The first real move came on a moonless November evening. I cranked the gate open wider, and the lake began to drain, a slow, deliberate seep. By morning, the waterline had dropped a foot. I stood on my shore, watching the ripples fade, the lake's edge retreating like a betrayed lover. Across the water, I saw lights flicker on in the mansions, silhouettes moving behind glass. They'd noticed. Good. I kept my routine normal. Coffee on the porch, trips to town in my old truck, acting oblivious. But Karen was already mobilizing. She called an emergency HOA meeting, and Mrs. Ellis, bless her, slipped me the details. They were hiring a lawyer, talking about injunctions, accusing me of sabotage. I wasn't worried. The dam was mine, and they had no legal ground to stand on. Then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. One evening, as I checked the dam, I found a boy, maybe 16, skinny, with a mop of dark hair, crouched near the gate, tampering with the controls. He froze when he saw me, dropping a wrench that clattered against the concrete. "Who sent you?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. He stammered, eyes darting, then blurted, "My mom, Karen Whitaker. She said you're ruining everything." My heart sank. This wasn't just Karen's war, it was personal. Her son, Jake, was caught in the middle, a pawn in her game. I let him go, warning him not to come back, but his fear stuck with me. What kind of mother drags her kid into something like this? I felt a pang of guilt, but it only hardened my resolve. If Karen wanted a fight, she'd get one. The lake kept dropping, 2 feet, then 3. Docks tilted awkwardly, their pilings exposed like skeletal remains. The HOA's panic was palpable. I'd drive past their gates and see them gathered in clusters, pointing at the water, their faces tight with worry. Karen's SUV roared up to my cabin one morning, and she stormed out, her heels sinking into the mud. "You're destroying our homes," she screamed, her face red, her perfectly manicured nails jabbing the air. I leaned against my porch railing, calm as I could muster. "You destroyed my bridge, Karen. This is just balance." She threatened lawsuits, police, everything short of divine intervention. I shrugged. "Go ahead. Try." She left, tires spinning, but I knew she was rattled. The lake was down 5 feet now, and their paradise was unraveling. I started getting calls from other HOA members, not threats, but pleas. A woman named Linda, whose husband owned the mansion next to Karen's, begged me to stop. "We didn't know about the bridge," she said, her voice trembling. Karen pushed it through. "Please, we just want our lake back." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it wasn't enough. They'd stood by while my bridge was torn apart. They didn't get to play innocent now. Still, Jake's face haunted me. I didn't want to hurt him or kids like him, caught in their parents' wars. I adjusted the plan. I'd lower the lake to 8 feet, enough to make my point, then stop. But I wasn't done with Karen. The confrontation came on a gray December morning, the air thick with the promise of snow. The lake was down 7 feet, and the mansion's shorelines were a mess of exposed roots and stranded fish. I'd set up a small camera of my own near the dam, not to spy but to document. I knew Karen would come for me, and I wanted proof of my actions, and hers. She arrived at dawn, not alone but with Greg and 2 other HOA board members, a man named Paul and a woman, Diane, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They stood at the dam, Karen in the lead, her coat flapping in the wind, her voice a whip. "You think you can ruin us, Ethan? You're nothing. We'll bury you in court." I stood my ground. The dam's control will cold under my hands. "You buried yourselves when you tore down my bridge," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "This dam's on my land. I can do what I want with it." Greg stepped forward, his face flushed, fists balled like he might swing. Paul grabbed his arm, muttering something about calming down. Diane looked at the lake, her eyes wide, and I saw the first crack in their unity. "Karen, maybe we should talk to him," she whispered, but Karen snapped. "No. He's a nobody. He doesn't get to win." That's when I twisted the wheel, just a quarter turn, and the water surged louder, a low roar that made them all flinch. The lake dropped another inch before their eyes. The tension was electric, the air crackling with their fear and my defiance. Karen's eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, I saw something beneath her fury, desperation. She wasn't just fighting for her mansion. She was fighting for her identity, her control, her place at the top. I almost pitted her. Almost. Then Greg lunged, not at me, but at the wheel, trying to force it shut. I shoved him back, harder than I meant to, and he stumbled into the mud. Paul shouted, Diane gasped, and Karen screamed, "You'll pay for this." It was chaos, raw and unscripted, and I knew I'd pushed them to the edge. But I wasn't backing down. That night, I found another surprise. A letter from Jake slipped under my door. It was handwritten, shaky, and it hit me like a punch. "I'm sorry about the bridge," he wrote. "Mom made me help. I didn't want to. Please don't hate me." My stomach twisted. Jake wasn't just a pawn. He was a kid, trapped in his mother's vendetta. I sat on my porch, the letter in my hands, and felt the weight of what I was doing. This wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about everyone. The neighbors who'd done nothing, the kid who'd been dragged into it, the lake that tied us all together. I didn't want to be the villain in Jake's story, but I couldn't let Karen win, either. I adjusted the gate again, slowing the drain to a trickle. 8 feet was enough. Their docks were useless, their views ruined, their property values in free fall. I made my point. But Karen wasn't done. She filed for an injunction, claiming I was causing irreparable harm. The sheriff showed up, a tired man named Tom who'd known my grandfather. He read the court order, then looked at me with a half-smile. "Ethan, you're stirring up a hornet's nest. You sure about this?" I nodded, showing him my deed and the dam's permits. He sighed, tipped his hat, and left. The law was on my side for now. The HOA's next move was public. They held a press conference, Karen at the podium, her voice trembling with rehearsed outrage. "Ethan Caldwell is waging war on our community," she declared, cameras flashing. "He's destroying our lake, our homes, our way of life." I watched it on my laptop, the grainy live stream making her look smaller, less invincible. The comments below were brutal. Some called her a victim, others called her a bully. I didn't care about the noise. I cared about the truth, and it was starting to surface. Mrs. Ellis called me that night, her voice excited. People are talking, Ethan. They're questioning Karen. Keep going. And so I did. The lake was a shadow of itself, its surface a good 8 feet below normal, the once pristine shores now a patchwork of mud and debris. The mansions looked stranded, their docks jutting out like broken promises. I'd stopped the drain, locking the gate to hold the level steady, but the damage was done. Real estate agents stopped bringing clients to Serenity Shores. Signs reading "for sale" sprouted like weeds, though no one was buying. The HOA's funds were bleeding out, spent on lawyers and PR firms trying to spin the disaster. Karen's empire was cracking, and I could feel the tide turning. But victory wasn't sweet yet. Jake's letter gnawed at me, a reminder that my war had collateral damage. I found him one afternoon, fishing at the lake's edge, far from his mother's mansion. He looked up, startled, then relaxed when he saw I wasn't angry. I meant what I wrote, he said quietly, casting his line. I didn't want to hurt you. I sat beside him, the silence heavy but not hostile. Why'd you do it then? I asked. He shrugged, his eyes on the water. Mom said it was for the community. Said you were trouble. I told him about the bridge, about my grandfather, about why it mattered. He listened, nodding slowly, and for the first time, I saw a kid who wasn't his mother's shadow. Karen, though, was doubling down. She organized a protest at the dam. A dozen HOA members with signs reading "Save Our Lake" and "Stop Ethan Caldwell." I watched from a distance, my camera rolling, capturing their chants, their anger, their desperation. Karen led the charge, her voice carrying over the wind, accusing me of eco-terrorism. It was absurd, but it was effective. Local news picked it up, and suddenly I was the villain in their story. I didn't care about the headlines, but I cared about the lake. I'd never meant to kill it, only to teach them a lesson. Now, I wasn't so sure I'd drawn the line in the right place. The collapse came faster than I expected. At the next HOA meeting, Karen faced a revolt. Diane, the board member who'd hesitated at the dam, stood up and called for her resignation. You dragged us into this, she said, her voice shaking but firm. You destroyed his bridge without a vote, without proof. Now look at us. Others joined in, their anger turning from me to her. Paul, Greg, even Linda, they all spoke out, their loyalty crumbling under the weight of their losses. Karen fought back, her voice shrill, but the room was against her. By the end of the night, she was no longer president. She stormed out, her face a mask of humiliation. I heard about it from Mrs. Ellis, who'd snuck into the meeting with a friend. It's not over, Ethan, she warned. Karen's not the type to go quietly. She was right. The next morning, I found my truck's tires slashed, the words "You'll pay" scrawled in paint across the hood. I didn't need to guess who did it. I called Tom, the sheriff, and showed him the damage. He took photos, asked questions, but said there wasn't enough evidence to pin it on Karen. I didn't need evidence. I knew. And I knew she was desperate, cornered, dangerous. I tightened security around the dam, adding a padlock to the gate and checking my camera daily. The lake was holding at 8 feet below normal, a compromise I'd made to avoid permanent harm. But the HOA was in chaos, their funds drained, their unity shattered. I'd won, in a way, but it didn't feel like victory. Jake's face, his quiet apology, kept me up at night. I started to wonder if I'd gone too far, if my need for justice had blinded me to the cost. I decided to make one last move, not for revenge, but for resolution. I'd offer to restore the lake, but only if they rebuilt my bridge. It was a gamble, but I was tired of war. I sent the offer through Mrs. Ellis, knowing she'd get it to the right people. It was simple. I'd raise the lake's level back to normal, but they had to rebuild my bridge, same design, same spot, fully permitted. No apologies, no groveling, just action. I didn't expect them to agree easily, not with Karen still lurking, but I hoped the new board, led by Diane, would see reason. The response came faster than I thought. Diane called me, her voice cautious but earnest. We'll do it, she said. But we need time. And we need you to stop draining the lake. I agreed, locking the gate for good. The water stayed low, but the draining stopped. It was a truce, fragile but real. Rebuilding the bridge took weeks. I watched from my porch as workers hauled planks and drove pilings, the sound of hammers echoing across the lake. Diane oversaw the project, checking in with me to ensure it matched my original design. She was different from Karen, quiet, practical, willing to listen. We talked about the lake, the community, the mistakes we'd all made. She admitted the HOA had been wrong, that Karen's obsession with control had blinded them. I admitted I'd let my anger push me too far. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was understanding, and that was enough. Karen, though, didn't fade quietly. She tried to rally her neighbors, spreading rumors that I'd blackmailed the HOA, that the new board was weak. No one listened. Her mansion went up for sale, the price slashed as the muddy shoreline deterred buyers. I saw her once, driving out of the gates, her face pale, her eyes fixed ahead. Jake was in the passenger seat, staring out the window. I waved, but he didn't wave back. I hoped he'd find his own path, away from her shadow. The bridge was finished by February, sturdy and simple, just like before. I walked across it the first day, feeling the wood under my boots, the lake sparkling below. The water was still low, but I'd started opening the gate in reverse, letting the river feed the lake bit by bit. It would take months to restore, but it was healing. So was I? The HOA was different now, less arrogant, more human. They'd learned that power wasn't just money or rules. It was responsibility, too. I'd learned that revenge, while satisfying, left scars I hadn't expected. One evening, Jake showed up at my cabin, unannounced. He carried a small wooden box, carved with a heron, something he'd made himself. "For you," he said, his voice soft. "I'm sorry again." I took the box, my throat tight, and told him he didn't owe me anything. We sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the recovering lake, and talked about fishing, about his dreams of college, about anything but his mother. He wasn't his mother's pawn anymore. He was just Jake, and that was enough. The lake slowly rose, inch by inch, reclaiming the shores. The mansions looked alive again, their docks functional, their windows reflecting the water's shimmer. Serenity Shores wasn't perfect, but it was humbled. I'd won my fight, not by destroying them, but by forcing them to see me, to see the lake, to see what mattered. I'd lost something too, my innocence, maybe, or my belief that justice was clean. But I'd gained something better, a bridge, a kid who'd found his courage, and a lake that still sang its quiet song. The air was thick with tension that gray December morning, the lake's muddy shores a stark backdrop to the confrontation at the dam. Ethan stood firm, his hands gripping the cold metal wheel, the roar of escaping water punctuating the silence. Across from him, Karen Whitaker's face was a mask of fury, her coat flapping in the wind as she jabbed a finger at him, her voice cutting through the chill. Greg, her husband, hovered close, his fists clenched, while Paul and Diane, the other HOA members, shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the dam and the receding lake. The scene was raw, primal, a clash of wills etched against the stark concrete of the dam, the exposed lakebed a silent witness to their war. Scrawled in bold red paint on a nearby boulder, the words "Lake's Revenge" screamed a truth no one could ignore. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling, not just of the lake's edges, but of the fragile threads holding Serenity Shores together. I'd never meant to break them completely, only to bend them until they saw reason. The dam was my weapon, but it was also my burden. Every time I checked the gate, I saw Jake's letter, his shaky handwriting, his plea for forgiveness. It made me question the cost of my fight, but it also reminded me why I'd started. Karen had taken something from me, something I'd built with my hands, my heart. I couldn't let that go unanswered. The HOA's collapse wasn't just Karen's fall, it was a reckoning for everyone. Diane's leadership brought a new tone, less pomp, more pragmatism. She met with me weekly, updating me on the bridge's progress, asking about the lake's recovery. We weren't friends, but we were allies, bound by a shared desire to fix what had been broken. The other residents started to see me differently, too. Linda, the one who'd begged me to stop, brought me a pie one day, her way of saying sorry. I accepted it, not because I forgave her, but because I was tired of grudges. Karen's mansion stayed on the market, a ghost of her former reign. I heard she'd moved to the city, chasing a new stage for her ambitions. Jake stayed behind with his dad, finishing high school, fishing when he could. I saw him sometimes, casting from the shore, and we'd nod to each other, a quiet acknowledgement of what we'd been through. The bridge stood strong, a testament to what I'd fought for, and the lake was climbing back, its surface catching the light like it used to. Serenity Shores would never be the same, but maybe that was the point. We'd all been forced to look at ourselves, to see the flaws in our foundations. I kept the heron box Jake gave me on my mantle, a reminder that even in war, there's room for grace. The lake taught me that, too. It didn't judge, didn't hold grudges. It just flowed, adapted, survived. I wanted to be like that, strong, but not cruel, steady, but not stubborn. The fight with Karen had changed me, but it hadn't broken me. It had shown me what I was capable of, for better or worse. And as I walked across my bridge each morning, coffee in hand, the lake sparkling below, I knew I'd found something worth fighting for. Not just a bridge, but a home, a truth, a chance to make things right.